one of the things that came up at our early stakeholder meeting was that we didn't really have good understanding of what our local economy was at that time, what kind of businesses we had, what their turnover was, how many people they employed, that kind of thing. So that was one of the reasons that we undertook the research, was to find out more about, well, what have we got at the moment, and provide a bit of a baseline for us that we could then measure progress against. But the main reason we did all the data analysis and the research was to put some numbers, some big numbers on the opportunities that we see in our local economic system. And those numbers are around the potential turnover, so the size of these sectors. So if we relocalise the food sector, what's it worth? If we retrofit all of our homes, what's it worth? Because we suspected these were going to be really big numbers and would relate to a number of jobs. And it was that research that came up with those numbers that then gave credibility to the document. So rather than just saying, oh, sustainability is a great thing and a new economy is a great thing, we can show that, and that's in the language of these stakeholders who are interested in jobs and turnover. So we're connecting with them on that bottom line, if you like. But what we're also able to do is to show the enormous benefits that come in addition to those jobs and that turnover if we take this approach to economic development. So the social benefits that can accrue and the environmental benefits and the level of environmental protection that can be offered by relocalising a food system, for example.
Why do the economic evaluation work, the research and the analysis part of it? The answer that first comes to my mind is whenever you start peering into something, that's when you start learning a lot of things that you didn't know. And even though I count myself as a quite experienced environmental professional, I learned a lot of things about my own area in which I've lived for the last 30 years by starting to find out things that I thought at the outset somebody is sure to just tell me. They're going to pluck a report off the shelf and tell me this stuff. And I discovered quickly not only that nobody knew simple things about our own area, but that I didn't know very much about it either. And that led to a very long and detailed journey, which I think would be helpful to anybody to follow.
Why go through all the research and the data sets is a really good question, and it has been the most productive thing, I think, or one of the most productive things that we've done. And it's because if you can show the evidence to people in numbers, we're so used to looking at numbers and figures, and that's how big companies say we're going to deliver X amount of jobs, and people say, oh, that's great, you're delivering X amount of jobs. So for us to be able to say £30 million is spent on food in Totnes District every year, and that in itself, people go, wow. And then you say, and £22 million of that goes out through 2 small supermarkets. That really concentrates people's minds. And then you start to talk about the jobs that could be created and the money that could be circulated locally, and then the additional benefit through the local multiplier. Then that really starts to speak to more and more people. But you need that basic data and evidence there before people will have that conversation.
Doing the research and doing these reports can give you a lot of credibility, but it also provides an evidence base, and it gives some weight and some ammunition to the arguments that some of your stakeholders might want to make, to their own organizations. Especially important if you're talking about town council and district council and county council types of folks who might be involved.
I think the hardest thing about doing any of the reports, the detailed reports, so food or retrofit or renewables, was knowing which of the hundreds of reports you could get your hands on were the ones that were most useful to you. So we all spent quite a bit of time reading a lot of things and thinking, oh, there's some really useful data in there, and then reading another report and saying, oh no, well that trumps that, that is much, much better. So it was a real learning process that by the end of it we knew, okay, if I'd found that report at the very beginning, I would have saved myself days of effort.
It's very important to use good practice about the detail and the data, because probably 2 reasons. One, you will otherwise get very confused yourself and the people you're working with, and you'll probably retread things and spend a lot of extra time if you're not clear about what you're looking for and if you're not clear about the quality of what you've got. So both of those things mean that you actually have to be methodical and even meticulous about noting down where you got the information that you may decide to use. And so that probably means that when you're reading your way through electronic reports, or even looking at electronic spreadsheets that are full of data, and maybe taking some of that data and trying to use it in your own spreadsheets, you need to be absolutely careful about what you did at each stage. Because one of the things that can happen is you discover that a piece of information on which you were relying turned out to be faulty, and then you need to be able to go back and unpick no more than necessary of where things went wrong. And also, if other people are going to learn from this, then you need to be able to explain to them how you got to where you got to. There's also a question of professional credibility here. If you're going up against people perhaps in your own local government research team, you need to be able to satisfy them that you did a good job, and that means being able to take them through the stages and the steps that you went through in order to come out with the numbers you came out with.
I was involved in doing the research. I did 2 of the 3 reports that we pulled together, and I'll tell you, it took much longer than I expected. I spent about 50 hours doing research and writing on each one. I thought after doing the first one, the second one would be easier, but it wasn't really. So that was kind of an interesting learning experience.
You're going into literally a sea or a swamp of information and data that to some extent is really endless. I ended up with not just dozens but hundreds of reports and spreadsheets all feeding into the work that I did. And it will save a huge amount of time and energy if you are quite clear as to what are the nuggets of information that you're really looking for when you come to reading a report, or indeed when you come to interviewing somebody who is a gatekeeper for that sort of information. If you can be absolutely specific what you're looking for. And of course, it won't just be one thing, it'll almost be breadcrumbs. It'll be, I need to know this in order to know that, in order to work out the final answer, which is that. So it's almost like backtracking from the final piece of information that you want to be able to broadcast to people as to all the little steps that will lead you towards that point. And that's easier said than done. But I think it's worth spending time at the very front end of your project trying to work out what all those stepping stones will be in each of your focus areas.
I think one of the main learnings about the data gathering and the data analysis in particular is to be really clear on your research questions, because if you just go out with this idea of I'm going to research my local food sector and what it could possibly do, that's an enormous task. So by narrowing it down to 3 or 4 specific questions, you can then just try and really focus in your search on answering those questions. So being really clear on those from the outset is a really good thing. And if you want to use the same kind of data sources that we've used and that we're going to present as part of this course, you might not want to stray too far from the kinds of research questions that we're suggesting. Otherwise, you're going to get into a whole new territory.
Clearly, if the objective of this work is to come up with economic data that stakeholders will understand and respect, then I think we are talking about detailed work. And certainly in Herefordshire, I felt that I was working with fellow professionals in the research unit and also in sustainability unit and in the housing department, you know, who would only respect work that was on good foundation. So that really means that you do have to be asking, searching detailed questions and not just unquestioningly lifting stuff out of reports that may appear to have been very thorough, but are not always. Some consultancy work is really third rate. And maybe the people in the research unit haven't twigged that yet because maybe they haven't had time to. I really do think that there's a responsibility on us doing this work to pull the veil aside and look and see what really is the quality of this information. Even if other people have relied on it, we should be willing to question it. Now, beyond that, it is also easy to disappear up your own backside. And I don't know that there's an easy formula to prevent you from doing that, but I think some of it is in being clear as to what are the questions that you're trying to answer.
You know, once you dive into the research and start doing this analysis, I think there's a real temptation to achieve perfection. And I would just like to say that I think that's a mistake. That's a real seduction that you need to avoid. These are not master's theses. These are reports that are trying to help you achieve a goal. And so make them good enough and be happy with that. Don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good.
There's something really important about defining the scope of this work and sticking to it, because it becomes very tempting to go off down different areas and explore different avenues because they're interesting, because they might be relevant, and that can suck up a lot of your time. So this thing about focusing on the research questions is really important.
Stakeholder group that we spoke about earlier, I developed one-to-one relationships with people who had access to key data that I either couldn't have got at all in some cases, or would have spent a long time getting. So these are, in my case, essentially people who work in local government, who were very friendly and supportive and helpful within the constraints of the time they had available. And I built up a lot of my knowledge over a period of months by having one-to-ones on the telephone or even face-to-face with these people. And then towards the end of the project, when I was beginning to construct rough drafts, I shared those with those people and got feedback, and in at least one case this led to us discovering quite a big flaw in the data that we had to go back and rework. So building those one-to-one relationships, I mean, even better if you can, out of one-to-one relations, put together a sort of expert advisory group. I think that would be a really interesting thing to do. Didn't quite happen in my case, but there certainly were a small group of people I worked with on an individual basis that we couldn't have got where we got to without.
I think a benefit of doing that primary research would have been that we would have been able to involve more people from the start, to feel involved in what we were doing. So if it was around food, then the food group could have gone out to talk to all the different food companies and businesses. And that's happened over the last couple of years that we've been doing the economic blueprint work. But it only happened latterly, and we're kind of running to catch up now.
A large part of the value of doing this work is to be able to pass on to other people where to go to get stuff. And essentially that means the referencing in the reports. And there's a bit of an art form when you find a piece of data in a spreadsheet as to how you actually get the URL that will take somebody straight to that piece of data, and how you actually capture that URL at the time that you are mining the data and keep it in the right place, so that then when you come to write the report, that then becomes an easy thing to add into the report or into the references section of the report, is how do you get to that particular spreadsheet.